Britain's jails are overflowing. More than 87,000 prisoners are currently incarcerated within their walls. For almost all of these, the aim is rehabilitation and release. But a tiny number are deemed so dangerous and depraved that they will never be freed. This extraordinary group of 45 men and 1 woman includes serial killers, torturers, hired assassins, and psychotic sadists. In some cases, the faces are familiar. Others are better known by the nicknames given to them by the press. But many of them you will never have heard of. This series will shine a light on the dark world of some of these killers. The subject of tonight's programme is a man who terrorised a Welsh community for more than a decade and who nearly got away with murder.
John Cooper is the most evil man that I've ever come across.
He was a one-man crime wave.
He certainly terrorised the area in a sense. Nobody knew who was doing these things.
Responsible for armed robberies, a brutal rape and 4 shocking murders.
Richard had been shot once in the abdomen and then a raking shot to the head.
You're making things try to fit to John Cooper, and it's bloody annoying.
He's probably one of the most dangerous criminals there's ever been in Welsh history.
He was a local celebrity who nobody suspected. But 25 years after he first struck, Cooper's reign of terror was finally brought to an end.
The only way to protect the community from Cooper is to ensure that he never sees the light of day again.
Pembrokeshire, in West Wales, an area of outstanding natural beauty, a national park with one of the lowest crime rates in Britain. But in 1985, 3 days before Christmas, the peace and quiet of this rural landscape was to be shattered. At Scoveston Farm, a raging fire had taken hold. Towering flames could be seen from the road.
It was a particularly harsh night, driving rain, howling winds, and it took some time to get that fire under control.
The occupants, brother and sister Richard and Helen Thomas, were feared trapped inside.
It was only after they'd managed to control the fire and damp it down, they found Helen. She was on top of bed springs and a mattress. It was quite clear that she'd fallen through the floors, the burnt-out floors from above. Soon after that, the body of Richard Thomas was found on the half landing between the first and the second floor.
Tragedy had struck, but it soon became apparent that this was no accident.
When Helen's body was excavated from that particular scene, something was tied around her neck, which was a shirt, which was either a gag or something to use to cover her head, and she had been shot. Richard had been shot once in the abdomen and then a raking shot to the head, and he died as a result of gunshot wounds. When they couldn't find a shotgun within the house, it was quite clear that the gun had been taken away, therefore there had to be a third-party involvement, therefore a double murder.
It appeared the killer had targeted the wealthy pair with the intention to rob. Helen had been tied up and shot at close range. Blood spatters indicated Richard had been killed near one of the outhouses before his body was dragged into the house, rolled up in a carpet and set alight. News of the murder travelled fast, and the community was in a state of shock.
The double murder was certainly unusual in this area. We'd had murders of various kinds, but they were family things and quarrels and kickings, but we'd never had anything like that I could remember before.
A double murder of people who are well known within the community, in the manner that they were killed, it sent shockwaves to that local community.
and the police were struggling to find a lead.
It had been a substantial fire, and there was very, very little left of the house, particularly the area surrounding the bodies. It was quite clear that the person responsible had set the fire in order to try and destroy any evidence and thwart the police investigation.
There were appeals. The police put out appeals for witnesses, and there were various things going on over the weeks. But they didn't seem to know exactly who they were looking for, really, at that time.
After several months, the investigation went cold, and the killer remained at large. Forensic psychologist Kerry Danes studies killers and what motivates them to commit their crimes.
All the signs point at this stage to it being a burglary gone wrong, but this isn't an ordinary burglar, because this is somebody who has gone prepared to kill and has killed. They've got enough forensic savvy to cover their tracks by setting fire to the place. We're not looking for a fledgling burglar, we're looking for somebody who's older, somebody who's organised, meticulous and absolutely ruthless.
Several miles from Scoverston is the picturesque town of Little Haven, a popular destination for walkers and holidaymakers. It was here, in June 1989, on the last day of their holiday, that Peter and Gwenda Dixon were enjoying a walk along the coastal path. But unbeknown to them, somebody was waiting. Just a few hundred yards from their campsite, the couple were confronted by a gunman, led to a secluded clearing, and tied up. They would never be seen alive again. Police dog teams would search for days before making a grim discovery.
Peter was lying face down, very, very close to the cliff edge. His hands were tied behind his back, and he'd been shot 3 times at close range. In what can only be described as an execution-style killing. Gwenda was nearby. She was also lying face down. Her trousers and underwear had been removed, exposing parts of her body, and clearly she had been subject to a sexual assault. She'd also been shot on 2 occasions. It must have been an absolutely horrific scene for those officers to find.
Once again, a double murder had left a community in shock.
It was a mystery, because it was not a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't conventional in any way. It was just 2 innocent people on the footpath, beautiful day, beautiful scene, sunny day. They were just shot down.
Police were now hunting an extremely violent man with few clues to go on. The Dixons' possessions were scattered around their bodies, but Peter's wallet was missing. And in the days after the murder, his cash card was used to withdraw money.
A witness came forward to say that they'd seen an individual at 7 o'clock in the morning using the cash point. That individual could only have been the person in possession of Peter Dixon's cash card.
An artist impression was drawn up of a scruffy man wearing shorts.
He certainly terrorised the area in a sense, although, well, for the simple reason that nobody knew who was doing these things. And there was certainly a lot of fear in the Little Haven area in particular, to the extent that the National Park found that nobody was walking that section of the footpath.
But despite widespread appeals, the suspect was never traced. For the second time in 4 years, a vicious double murder remained unsolved. 7 years later, in 1996, the mystery killer still hadn't been caught. Pembrokeshire was in the middle of a crime epidemic, with a serial burglar on the prowl. And on a summer's evening, it would once again play host to a shocking, violent attack. 5 children, aged between 14 and 16, were playing in a field when they noticed torchlight coming towards them.
Initially they thought it was one of their friends and shouted out to the individual, but quite quickly they became aware that it wasn't their friend, when the man actually then pointed what appeared to be a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun at them.
In an isolated field, the children's cries wouldn't be heard.
He subjected them to disproportionate amount of violence to control them by kicking them, hitting them around the head with the butt of the gun and demanding that they lay on the floor. He asked them their names and he asked them their ages before selecting two of the girls who he took away from the group, raping one and then indecently assaulting the other.
Police quickly concluded the armed rapist must be local.
Quite clearly it was somebody who was comfortable in the area. They are on foot. They are prowling the fields.
Someone was terrorising their own community. 4 people had lost their lives, and Pembrokeshire was living in fear. But when police launched a late-night pursuit of a violent robber, little did they know they were hot on the heels of their mystery killer.
He particularly threw away a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun, gloves, balaclava.
This was a man who went out with a kit to burgle and to rob, and he knew exactly what he was doing.
By 1996, the picturesque county of Pembrokeshire in West Wales was being terrorised by crime. The double murders of Richard and Helen Thomas, shot dead at their remote farmhouse before it was set alight, remained unsolved. The murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, executed on a coastal path at Little Haven, also remained a mystery. And a violent armed attack and rape on children was fresh in the minds of the local community.
It was constantly at the back of your mind when you're trying to enjoy the area, such a beautiful area that we live in Pembrokeshire. It was a constant reminder there that the fact there was actually someone out there who was capable of such horrific crimes. It was always something that constantly plagued you, not only as a parent but also as a police officer.
For 10 years, police had also been hunting a serial burglar who was striking at will. All of the crimes followed a similar, sinister pattern.
Invariably they were in the rural area. Invariably they backed on to fields. Very, very short space of time where the actual owners of the properties had left their houses. The offender breaking in, stealing cash and jewellery.
There was a lot of fear and a lot of unease in the area. I got friends living out there, and they had their house broken into by somebody. They were pretty nervous about the whole thing, and there was a lot of suspicion as to who was doing it.
Police studied the crimes and their locations and devised a tactic to catch the offender red-handed.
Because of the number of offences which had been carried out in that particular locality, and it's a really sort of tight geographical area, the local policing commanders at the time put a contingency plan in place to respond to the activation of alarms or the reports of any burglaries in progress.
The rapid response team included armed officers and search dogs ready to react to reports of a break-in. They wouldn't have to wait long before they were called into action at a small village called Sardis.
A lone female in the house was confronted by a masked man, gloves, brandishing a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun. He'd subjected her to disproportionate amount of violence to control her, striking her, hitting her around the head with the butt of the gun and threatening to kill her before stealing cash and jewellery from the house. She managed to activate an alarm, causing the offender to flee the scene. He then ran off into the night along the hedgerow.
The police response team tracked the offender's scent through nearby fields. Along the way, they found items apparently discarded by the fleeing suspect.
He particularly threw away a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun, gloves, balaclava, a fleece, rope, and also pots of chilli powder and curry powder, which clearly were there to put any following dogs off the scent.
But it hadn't worked. Investigators now had a hoard of items which confirmed their suspect was a prolific, armed burglar.
It's a person that covered his tracks. This was a man who went out with a kit to burgle and to rob, and he knew exactly what he was doing.
The person who's committed this crime has really prepared for all eventualities. Who thinks to take chili powder out with them to throw off sniffer dogs? This is somebody who is incredibly committed to offending. It's somebody who has used more violence than you would need to commit a burglary. So they're not just meeting their needs for, say, money, financial gain. They're meeting a much deeper, a much more deep-seated pathological need for being an aggressor.
The trail of discarded items led police from Sardis along hedgerows and footpaths for almost 2 miles, arriving at a small cluster of houses. Police began door-to-door inquiries, believing their offender could be nearby. House by house, they collected DNA samples and fingerprints to eliminate locals from their list of suspects. The last house on the street belonged to John William Cooper. At home with his wife and children, Cooper was far from cooperative.
Officers attending were faced with Cooper refusing to give any samples. Clearly it raised their suspicion. It was felt that Cooper had something to hide.
And in the family home, police spotted more reasons to be suspicious.
There was items of property in his house which were identical to items of property stolen in the series of burglaries which had taken place in that area over a number of years. It was at that stage that Cooper was effectively the prime suspect.
But who was John Cooper? Born in Milford Haven, he was one of 4 brothers and proved to be a troublemaker from an early age.
I remember John Cooper as a youth of 15 or 16, coming up regularly in Milford Haven Court, Magistrates Court, for violence and, general thuggery in the pubs, assault and just being a blooming nuisance, drunk and disorderly, that sort of thing. He was, athletic, well-built, strong and aggressive.
As Cooper matured, he gave the impression of a family man. He married and had 2 children, but behind closed doors, it was anything but the perfect home life.
We know that Cooper was a dominant and oppressive force within the family home. He was violent to his family. Now, sadly, that's not uncommon, and it's not uncommon for these people to be, as Cooper was, a very friendly, affable, nice chap down the pub.
Indeed, Cooper was a popular member of the community, working hard as a farm labourer and handyman.
He worked locally, he socialised locally, he was well into his darts, he was a county dart player. He attended a number of the local pubs where he played darts over a number of years.
Cooper even appeared on the popular television game show Bullseye.
You've got £220, what are you going to do?
We'd like to gamble.
Still do it. Oh, unlucky.
But although he lost, he wasn't always down on his luck. Back in 1978, he won big money on Spot the Ball.
But 90,000, I understand, which was a lot of money then. He bought a horse or 2. I think he bought 1 or 2 race horses, if I remember. Not anything really expensive, but enough.
His new wealth had enabled Cooper to escape to the country, settling in Rosemarket. But a gambling habit saw his winnings disappear and the violent temper return.
The property that he lived in for a number of years rent-free because he had actually beaten his landlord so badly that he would never go back and collect rent from him.
Despite his episodes of violence, Cooper's criminal record gave no indication that he could be the wanted armed robber.
There was nothing within his criminal offending which would actually directly point to the fact that he as an individual would go out, prowl in the fields at night, brandishing a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun, rob and attack people. Nothing at all in that background would probably indicate the reason why he'd been under the radar for so long.
But with the trail leading back to his family home, Cooper was arrested on suspicion of the armed robbery, and his property was searched by specialist teams. Every possible hiding place was explored, no matter how unlikely.
The cesspit was emptied and over 500 sets of keys were found in that cesspit. A number of those keys actually fitted the doors to premises which had been attacked during the spate of burglaries in the area.
Amongst raw sewage, Cooper had stashed a reminder of his twilight activities, and that wasn't all.
Another location of significance which was searched was a waste pipe, part of the sewage and plumbing of the house. When that was actually removed, within it was found a double-barrel shotgun, and also with it was a box of cartridges. The gun was also wrapped in oilcloth, which to me indicates that at some stage it would be recovered and used as a weapon.
Police had found jewellery on the route to Cooper's home. So the search team spread out, checking surrounding fields for any other hidden surprises.
Quite quickly the officers started to find large amounts of discarded jewellery stashed in hedgerows. My belief is that he used the hedgerows as safes, and as he was coming back from his offending, he would sort out various items of particular gold, which he'd then sell on for cash.
Over 13 days, police seized hundreds of items, which were sent for analysis. The finds offered police an insight into Cooper's psychology.
Cooper kept a huge number of souvenirs, like you or I might collect, say, family photographs or birthday cards. And why do we collect souvenirs but to relive happy memories, pleasant memories, and to feel closer to that time? So clearly, this was his way of staying close, staying connected with his offences and that persona that he had during his offences.
I'm interviewing Mr. John William Cooper.
With a wealth of evidence found in and around his home, Cooper was asked to explain himself.
Have you any explanation you want to put forward in respect of this offence?
But Cooper refused to answer any questions.
A single cufflink has been found buried in your garden. Why are you burying jewellery, Mr. Cooper?
And he displayed some bizarre behaviour.
Episodes of him lying in the fetal position on the floor, refusing to come out of his cell, refusing to wash, shave or eat.
Mr. Cooper is seated with his back towards me, facing the wall.
I think that his behaviour during interview was quite childish, really, and petulant. And I think that he regressed into that state because he couldn't use his normal methods of controlling a situation. He couldn't resort to violence in an interview room. He couldn't be a bully. It wouldn't get him very far. So he just shut down. It was total non-compliance. He wasn't going to go there with them.
But you've had the fullest of opportunity to make any response that you would like, but you have declined to do so.
Cooper was charged with the Sardis robbery and 30 further burglaries and stood trial at Swansea Crown Court. He pleaded not guilty, but a jury didn't believe him and he was sentenced to 16 years in prison.
Well, it was a feeling of tremendous relief in the area because, and also a sharpening of the feeling that he was involved in Scoveston because of the proximity to his house.
The police shared the belief that Cooper could have killed Richard and Helen Thomas at Scoveston Farm more than a decade earlier. A map plotting each of his burglaries was drawn up. Significantly, Scoveston Farm was right in the centre. Also close by was the field where 5 children had been assaulted and robbed. With Cooper now convicted of prowling fields with a loaded shotgun, he also came into the frame for the murder of the Dixons. For now, Cooper was in jail for armed robbery, but had he got away with murder? It would be 10 years before modern science could find the answer.
However well prepared an offender is and however well they think they've cleaned up after themselves, it's usually possible for us to find tiny traces of evidence to link them with their crime.
In Pembrokeshire, a serial burglar and armed robber has been sentenced to 16 years in prison. John Cooper was found to be behind a decade of serious crime, tormenting a usually safe part of West Wales.
Quite interestingly, when Cooper was arrested, the crime in that particular area fell by 90%.
Although the robberies had stopped, Pembrokeshire was still in fear as a series of brutal crimes remained unsolved. In 1985 at Scoveston Farm, a brother and sister had been shot dead and their farmhouse torched. 4 years later, 2 holidaymakers were attacked as they walked the coastal paths. The offender executed them in broad daylight before fleeing the scene. And in 1996, 5 children were robbed at gunpoint, the offender raping one and indecently assaulting another. With no arrests to put the community at ease, in 2005, police decided to reopen the files. In charge of the investigation was Detective Chief Superintendent Steve Wilkins.
Cooper was on the radar. We had no similar offences had taken place whilst he'd been in custody, so we just felt it was the right time for us to bring a focused review.
A specialist cold case team was set up to find new evidence that could unlock the case. It meant revisiting hundreds of thousands of documents, more than 1,500 original suspects, and 11,000 forensic exhibits. And John Cooper's name immediately cropped up. Living so close to Scoveston Farm, records showed Cooper was one of the first to be spoken to just days after the fire.
John Cooper was actually within the original house-to-house parameters and had actually been visited by officers where they asked him for his movements of the night.
His wife, living in fear of his violent outbursts and perhaps not knowing Cooper's precise movements, claimed he had been at home.
They said they were all together and there was no reason to disbelieve that alibi at the time.
Following the murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon on the coastal path, police had again visited Cooper at his family home.
It was established that Peter's gold band wedding ring, which was a 22-carat gold wedding ring, was missing from his finger. So one of the lines of inquiry was to establish whether any rings had been sold within Pembrokeshire or within a geographical area. At that time only 2 had been sold, and one of those had been sold by John Cooper.
Once more, Cooper had a well-prepared story to explain away the suspicion.
The explanation he gave was that yes, he had sold a wedding ring. In fact, it was his own wedding ring, and that was supported again then by his wife. So he very quickly came into the investigation and equally as quickly went out of it.
But the cold case team wouldn't be so easily deterred. The artist's impression, drawn up in 1989 following the Dixon's murder, was the best clue police had to the appearance of their mystery killer. So Steve Wilkins needed an image of Cooper taken around that time to see if he matched the description.
We were aware that he had appeared on the game show Bullseye, and we were able to establish it was actually filmed 3 weeks before the murders of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, and therefore provided a good description of how John Cooper looked at the time that artist impression was made. I've been a policeman for 32 years and over the years I've seen many artists' impressions, and what struck me is I've never seen one which is so close. And it was one of those eureka moments. To me it almost looked like a tracing.
Police were convinced that Cooper had committed a double murder just 3 weeks after going on national television. For Deputy Senior Investigating Officer Lynn Harries, the case was strong.
We had a whole variety of evidence that linked or potentially kind of put John Cooper in the frame. The ring, the fact that John Cooper had sold the ring. We had the artist's impression. It was a very similar appearance.
But when police presented their case to the Crown Prosecution Service, they were told they needed more evidence.
They said if you had that one piece of forensic evidence, a golden nugget, it would make a very strong circumstantial case into a very overwhelming prosecution of John Cooper.
Forensic experts began to examine the original evidence. Back in the 80s, the science was limited and tests had failed to pinpoint a suspect. But by 2007, The techniques were more advanced. Microscopic fibres and tiny blood samples could be reanalyzed to reveal who had left them at the crime scene. Expert scientist Angela Gallup was tasked with finding this modern evidence.
We started off in the Cooper case looking for DNA because DNA can provide such very strong links. And so we looked at all sorts of items and samples for DNA that could have come from the offender.
Thousands of exhibits were retested, including guns, gloves, and clothing.
However well prepared an offender is and however well they think they've cleaned up after themselves, it's usually possible for us to find tiny traces of evidence to link them with their crime.
And while the scientists got to work, Dyfed Powys police turned their attention back to John Cooper. He was nearing the end of his prison sentence, and they faced a race against time to bring charges against him. Under interview in 1998, Cooper had refused to answer police questions.
Why are you burying jewelry, Mr. Cooper?
But now the investigation hoped a new approach could get him talking, and possibly reveal a clue. Specialist interviewers Gareth Rees and Louise Harries spent months devising a plan to encourage Cooper to open up. It involved researching every part of his life.
It was like studying for an A-level history exam with a specialist subject of John Cooper. You've got to know everything you can about him.
So are you prepared to tell me, Mr. Cooper?
We need to know John Cooper better than he knew himself.
The team were given 1 year to plan for the most important interview in the force's history. On the 2nd of July 2008, they finally got to meet their suspect.
I'll never forget the first time I met him, and he just looked at me, stared me in the face. I said, "Have I met you before?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." I'm glad about that. I think he was trying to put his mark down and trying to make us feel a little bit intimidated.
There'd always been this thing about how evil he was in his eyes, and by looking at him he had these piercing eyes, and I'd always thought it was a bit of a myth almost. One of the first thoughts that went through my head is, oh, those eyes, they're unmistakable. We allowed him to sort of to have control really of the interviews. We just gave him free rein to speak because we wanted to get as much information from him as possible.
Okay, is everybody ready to commence?
Yes.
And the plan worked. For the first time, Cooper spoke at length.
When you heard their bodies obviously had been found, how did you feel?
Oh, sad. Sad and tragic. Well, I think everybody was saddened by it.
Detectives quickly realised that Cooper was placing himself at the crime scenes.
Have I been in the yard at Scoverson? Yes, I believe I've been in there, and yes, it was to pick up irrigation equipment, I believe.
When quizzed on the ropes used to tie up the Dixons on the coastal path near Little Haven, Cooper had another story.
Where my boat is, ropes are. Where the ropes and boats are, I am. So where I fished may be important to this investigation. We fished off Broadhaven. We have fished off Little Haven. Yeah. And there is a reason for that. And it's usually in the mackerel season, which would be summertime.
Time and again, Cooper offered unlikely stories to explain away his unfortunate link to crucial evidence.
He was trying to believe that he was the unluckiest person in the world. It became obvious that what he was trying to do was to put up plausible explanations or excuses to account for any future forensic linkage between him, the murder scenes and the crucial exhibits. And that's what he proceeded to do.
But after 4 days of questioning, police weren't convinced by Cooper's stories.
And I believe that you were responsible for the murder of Helen and Richard Thomas, and also the murders of Gwenda and Peter Dixon.
All I can say is I'm sorry if you've got that opinion, but you're totally wrong.
Despite the growing belief that Cooper was guilty, police had run out of time. No forensic evidence had been found, and having served his 16-year sentence for armed robbery, John Cooper was a free man.
The fear with anybody leaving prison is, are they going to do it again? And I think that the itch for Cooper to re-offend would be a difficult one not to scratch, and not to scratch very soon after release. This is a man who is committed to offending. He has planned and nurtured his offences. He's going to do it again.
With Cooper back in Pembrokeshire, the pressure on the cold case team increased. They needed to tie him to all of the crimes, and fast. And back at the lab, the forensic team were about to make a discovery.
We started to find textile fibres which looked as if they could have been left behind by the offender. They were on the Dixon's bodies and also on the branches that the offender used to hide Gwenda Dixon's body. And so we started to think more broadly then about whether or not there was a connection between those fibres and John Cooper. And so obviously we started looking at the clothing from his house.
One of the items of clothing was a pair of shorts, and when they were re-examined, they gave up a remarkable secret.
When we started looking for fibres amongst debris recovered from the shorts, we found a tiny flake of blood.
From this minute discovery, the team were able to raise a DNA profile. Dyfed Powys police were about to get their long-awaited breakthrough.
I received a telephone call from Angela Gallop saying to me, "Steve, are you driving?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She says, "I think you need to pull over." I said, "I'm okay, I'm on hands-free." She said, "No, Steve, I think you need to pull over. We've got Peter Dixon's blood on a pair of shorts belonging to John Cooper. It's the golden nugget, we've got it."
Police finally had a link between their prime suspect and the unsolved murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The net was closing in on John Cooper, and the cracks were beginning to show.
I'm fed up being called a liar. I'm trying to help you people. You all and your colleagues and them in there choose not to believe it, to look elsewhere.
In 2009, police are facing a race against time. John Cooper has been released from a 17-year sentence for armed robbery, and he was suspected of much more. Detectives are convinced that he killed Peter and Gwenda Dixon 20 years earlier. He's also suspected of murdering brother and sister Richard and Helen Thomas at Scoveston Farm in 1985, as well as carrying out an armed robbery and rape of children in 1996. Forensic science had made a breakthrough with a pair of shorts linking Cooper to one of the crimes, and more would soon follow. The team believed the gun carried by Cooper in the Sardis robbery could have been used to kill the Dixons on the coastal path. So it was sent off for another forensic examination.
The barrels had been painted with Hammerite paint. We asked them whether they could effectively forensically sterilise the gun and then remove the paint to see what was underneath it, which they did.
We discovered that there was a reddish cast to some of these black paint fragments, and actually the reddish cast was because there was blood there, tiny amounts of blood, and so we profiled that and got a DNA profile which matched Peter Dixon.
At that stage we knew we had the murder weapon.
And that wasn't all. Fibres on Cooper's gloves matched those found on branches used to conceal the Dixons' bodies. More minute fibres found on the sock of Scoveston Farm victim Richard Thomas matched those found on Cooper's clothes. And fibres found on the child rape victims were an identical match to the material of John Cooper's black gloves.
We've got tangible evidence linked to 4 murders, 5 robberies, a rape and indecent assault.
Just weeks after his release, the order was given for Cooper to be arrested. But as police swooped, they made an alarming discovery.
When he was arrested, particularly worrying was in the boot of his car we found a length of rope, some gloves, and we're also aware that he'd sourced an ordnance survey map of Pembrokeshire. So all the elements were there for him to start offending again. And my concern was that he would have, given the set of circumstances, he would have killed again.
Back in police custody, Cooper was quizzed on the new forensic evidence linking him to the murders. The most crucial item was the pair of shorts seized from Cooper's house. On them, scientists had found a minute spot of Peter Dixon's blood. Now, specialist interviewers Gareth Rees and Louise Harries needed Cooper to admit the shorts belonged to him.
Have you ever seen the shorts in this photograph, TWB1, before?
I believe those are my bathers, actually.
But when Cooper was asked if they resembled the artist's impression of the murder suspect, he unwittingly implicated himself.
I wanted to point out that those are long-legged shorts.
Okay, you're pointing the difference then, you say that they're not similar and that they're longer on the artist's impression?
Well, those are short-leg shorts, that's long-legged shorts.
Cooper's insistence that the shorts were different made police suspicious.
All it really did was it focused us on reviewing the shorts. The response we had from the scientists was, yes, those shorts had been shortened, not by the factory. They'd been done on a home sewing machine. John Cooper's wife was a seamstress.
We believed he had done that because he wanted to alter the fact that they were then different to the artist's impression. And this was a guy that was going back to 1989 when that artist's impression was first released. He decided to change that just in case anyone should ever recover those shorts. And this is the kind of cunning guy that we're dealing with.
So the shorts were sent back to the forensic team for more tests inside the hem.
We managed to find what looked like a very dilute blood stain on the shorts, and when we did the DNA profiling, while it was similar to the two Dixons, it didn't match either of them, and in the end we discovered that it matched their daughter, Julie Dixon.
Police puzzled over how Julie's DNA could have arrived on Cooper's shorts. The only explanation was that the shorts actually belonged to the Dixons, and that Cooper had stolen them during the attack.
It very much fitted in with the psychology of Cooper as a trophy hunter. As he'd kept the keys, he'd also kept these shorts.
And he'd not only kept them, John Cooper had worn the Dixon's shorts around town, even putting them on as he went to withdraw cash with Peter Dixon's bank card. The final pieces of the jigsaw were falling into place, but John Cooper was still in denial.
Because it all lies. I'm fed up being called a liar. I'm trying to help you people.
After 4 years of investigation, police had everything they needed to prove Cooper was the killer.
I basically said to him, it all comes back to you, isn't it? We've got the evidence, and there was a definite switch in him, wasn't there, in that last interview.
You're making things try to fit to John Cooper, and it's bloody annoying.
We go. There's forensic evidence. It all comes back.
You're a young lady, I once said, you're trying to make things fit. I try to put you and give you information that you can check. You all and your colleagues and them in there choose not to believe it, to look elsewhere.
I think that he knew then that things were closing in on him. So I think at that stage he knew the game was up, and he was going to face a Crown Court trial.
Cooper was charged with 4 murders, an armed robbery, rape and indecent assault. Despite all the evidence against him, he pleaded not guilty.
Not a surprise. We knew he'd go not guilty. You know, we knew what John Cooper was like. The stakes were higher. Life imprisonment. He had nothing left to go for. He had to go not guilty.
2 years of legal argument followed, but finally, in 2011 at Swansea Crown Court, John Cooper could face trial. A jury spent 8 weeks listening to the evidence, and on May the 26th, 2011, they unanimously found John Cooper guilty on all charges.
John Cooper is an evil man. He is the most evil man that I or any of my colleagues have ever come across or likely to come across.
The judge said that the murders were evil and that Cooper was a very dangerous, highly predatory man. With a criminal record of murder, armed robbery and violent sexual crime, Cooper joined the list of the 46 most serious and depraved offenders who will never be released from jail.
The combination of offences, and they're ranging from arsons to murders to robberies, rapes, use of firearms. He'd used a balaclava. I feel that he's probably one of the most dangerous criminals there's ever been in Welsh history.
John William Cooper, if he was out in the community, would kill again. And the only way to protect the community from Cooper is to ensure that he never sees the light of day again.